but it also helps as perhaps the most significant mechanism inside the text. It helps creating the artistic experience or aesthetic experience that the perceiver is getting from the texts. And this is basically where the term coming from Judee Burgoon meets or corresponds with Viktor Shklovsky's elementary terms that relate to all these processes, which are, as already mentioned and widely known, estrangement or defamiliarization, that were introduced like more than 50 years before Judee Burgoon in a not really completely different field, but so essentially different field or significantly different field, came up with of course who is also closely related to this, or at least in my opinion, is Paul Grice with his conversational maxims and of course conversational implicature. Those were about of the same timing as Burgoon's expectancy violation theory, although spanning from something like 1979 till 1991, during which time Grice wrote at least five books or contributions, out of which I consider at least three to be the most important, or in what refers to this subject. Of course, conversational maxims, easy to look it up on the internet or in any sources, but what counts for me is that he basically draw a picture of an ideal hypothetical situation where full communication, cooperative approach is the case between the author and the perceiver of his text, which obviously never happens in reality, and there are always slips from this ideal or this hypothetical norm. He defined it with four basic categories, like the exactly matching length or brevity, truthfulness, speaking to the point, and generally like not giving more or less than is necessary for this or that particular topic that is being rendered by the author's text. Obviously, such conversations would be perfect, but to some point boring. And that's exactly where we got another lead to how art works. I mean, again, another indirect confirmation of the fact that, as Samir Zeki says, art is basically a deliberate play with the receiver's or recipient's brain, a deliberate experiment carried out by the artist who tries this or that to see if it will work with the perceiver of his trials, artistic trials. And here we are basically into what Grice would describe as deviations from the conversational maxims. I mean, we leave a word unsaid. We leave part of the picture unseen, but the brain is fully capable of identifying, finding out what the missing part is. And this way we're not only into what Grice followed up with as conversational implicatures, which are basically all things that are left unsaid, or as he put it, like the texts usually speak about many more things that their face value is. I mean, as he says, for example, something like, we went to work by car, that says, you know, we were employed and we got a car at our disposal. We know how to drive, most likely, and we live in a country where their cars can be driven to work and or are usually driven to work, and so on. So just a small example, but more importantly, in terms of art perception, I think we're again back to Shklovsky, as I try to demonstrate, trying to reconcile both all Shklovsky, Burgoon, Grice, and also Ernst Gombrich to a certain extent, and in my paper on perception that I published at the Aesthetica Universalis review at the Moscow Governmental University, or Moscow State's University, MGU, back in 2019, and that brings, as I've said, us back to Shklovsky, where we are basically again talking about either omissions or deviations or modifications or violations, or like any things, any elements inserted in a text in order to not to be conforming to the norm, in order again in turn to produce the desired artistic aesthetic impression on the reader, on the perceiver, or create a aesthetic feeling, aesthetic experience in him. It's still the same principle, and what I also believe is that basically there is no distinction between whether we leave something out or put something more, or change the qualitative, let's say, dimension of the thing. I mean, if we use, for example, a jargon or slang expression in where a neutral one is expected, because in order to understand some topics, I think generalization is sometimes useful. And it's in the end also one of the goals of research. So I would suggest not to understand these deviations from the norm or violations as only, for example, omissions of words, as it could be the impression that, for example, Grice meant it, not only as redundancies or added paragraphs that seems to be of a qualitatively the exact opposite of omissions, and not only of qualitative changes, switching slang for or vulgar expressions for neutral, basically changing the non-marked for marked, non-markedness for markedness, as the Russian formalists would put it. But in fact, all modifications that are contrary to the norm from the point of the author, and contrary, most likely, to the expectations from the point of view of their perceiver.